Go for it.
All right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us. It's, I guess, the transition into afternoon, so good afternoon now. And we are here to present this webinar, From Application to Success, Essential Steps for Obtaining an Adult Use Cannabis License in Maryland. We thank you so much for joining us. If you did register and can't stay through the entire webinar, don't worry, we will be disseminating a recording of the webinar as well. The presenters today are myself. I'm Ellie Siegel, the founder and CEO of Longview Strategic, and John Wax, principal and founder of the Cannabis Law Group at Offit Kerman.
Good morning. Great to be with you.
Hi, everyone. So we're going to start out just talking a little bit about ourselves, give you a little bit of an overview of who we are. John, you want to start with yourself?
Sure. I have been serving cannabis companies, cannabis applicants, cannabis awardees, testing companies, ancillary service providers, industry lenders, and landlords since 2016. I am delighted to be here. I know we have a lot of really helpful information to share with you, so I am always available to help people. There are, I think, over 180 people who registered for today's presentation. These are going to be general comments, so if people have specific questions, please do reach out to Ellie or to me. Thanks.
I'm very excited also to be joining today to present. I am an attorney by background, but in the cannabis space in Maryland, I am a consultant offering information for companies and individuals, entrepreneurs that are looking to enter the space, expand in the space. We provide services at Longview Strategic throughout the world, but specifically with a sharp focus on Maryland, New Jersey, New York, the greater Mid-Atlantic region in the US. Our main buckets of service for this particular phase, the application phase, we focus on offering strategic advice, project management, technical writing, resource acquisition services, sometimes engaging folks for operational partnerships, and down the road, potentially the exit or sale of licenses, pretty much problem solving at any phase that an entrepreneur or operator may come up against. My background quick, I told you I'm an attorney. I also have my MBA, my BFA from NYU, and post-grad certificates in medical product development, regulatory affairs, and compliance for pharmaceuticals. All of these things, as I said, we lend a lot of information on the business side in conjunction with folks like John, to make sure that our clients are getting served very, very well and have a high potential to succeed. So the contents of my portion of this presentation, I will cover some of the regulatory language, talk about the contents of the application itself, the plans and the qualification for this particular application process, and then a little bit around strategy on the business side. And as I mentioned, we always pair our services with legal advice from law firms like John's, and they offer the legal analysis to pair with that business strategy that I'll talk a little bit about today. So first, let's start by reviewing the language from the regulations. We're going to talk a little bit about the essentials of the application first. The MCA determines whether an applicant will meet the qualifications for this lottery. It's a pass-fail lottery, and what they'll evaluate in your application is the three things you see listed here: a detailed operational plan, a business plan, and a detailed diversity plan. To qualify to be in this round, this is round one. It's reserved specifically and exclusively for social equity applicants. We'll refer to them as SEAs at times throughout this presentation. There will be a round two, we believe at this time. Round two will be open to all applicants beyond social equity, and it's slated to begin in the spring of 2024. In this round one, the license counts that we are expecting are listed here for you. It will be a 30-day period that will begin in September of 2023. For round one, the MCA will award up to the following licenses. For standard licenses, we expect to see 20 grower licenses, 40 processor, and 80 dispensary. For micro licenses, 30 grower, 30 processor, and 10 dispensary. And then in addition, 10 incubator space licenses as well. For the social equity qualification, to be a social equity applicant, like I mentioned before, these are the requirements. You must have lived in a disproportionately impacted area. You may hear us talk about DIA, that would be a disproportionately impacted area, for at least 5 of the last 10 years. To prove that, you're going to have to show tax returns, lease, residential agreement, voter registration, bank statements, utility bills, things of that nature to prove out that residency in that DIA. You must have attended a public school and a DIA for at least 5 years. That would be proven through transcripts showing 5+ years in that public school. Or, now this is an or, you must have attended a 4-year institution in the state where 40% or more of individuals who attended that university or institution met the Pell Grant eligibility. And that's proven with minimum of 2 years of transcripts from the qualifying school. And you may need to show qualifications if it's not handled by the MCA. So that's the SEA qualification set there. There should be a tool created by the MCA to assist Maryland applicants with pre-qualification for this social equity by residents through a map of DIA zones. Those zip codes are not available just yet. The MCA has announced its intentions to allow out-of-state applicants also to enter as social equity, but only if the applicant can prove their qualifications, likely by zip code. And again, those zones have not yet been identified, so those zip codes are not yet available, but we expect them here in the near future. We're going to talk first, after covering, these big bucket items about what's included, is the narrative plans. We're going to talk first about the operational plan, then the business plan, and then the diversity plan. We're going to shift after that. John will be talking more about elements of how to structure, how to proceed in your application outside of this content. I'm focusing on these plans first, and I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of what we think is necessary to prepare in each one, what you can prepare now, what you may not be able to prepare yet. So that's sort of 2 buckets that I'm going to talk about, because we want you to prepare anything that you can now towards each of these plans, because it's a robust amount of information that you're going to need to pull together. Again, though, without more specific language, from the MCA regarding page length and desired outlines and what needs to be included in these plans, it's important that you prepare a flexible draft so that you can pivot if need be as we get that additional information from the MCA. So let's talk about first the operational plan. The MCA requires a detailed operational plan for the safe, secure, and effective cultivation, manufacturing, or dispensing of cannabis. Elements of a successful operating plan would include the bullets here. We talk about descriptions of the compliance staffing and operational management roles. We give an explanation of compliance with each and every applicable regulation in order, if possible. Try not to skip any. I know that seems like a lot of information, but that's the goal. An emphasis on record-keeping procedures, inventory control, and employee and customer safety, with brief descriptions of the compliance executive's experience in highly regulated industries. The goal is to show the regulators that you will comply and how you will comply with all of the regulations. We generally try to include an assembly line description of the operational process, again, noting the applicable regulations that relate to each step of that process. And then proper nouns for prospective equipment and services. And what I mean there by proper nouns is specificity, giving actual names of the prospective equipment that will be used, service providers, laying out for the regulator as much detail around these operational processes as possible. In the best practices slide, we're talking here about in the operational plan, how you're going to lay out your best practices, your team member experience, compliance and safety, regulations that drive your procedures, not being too clever, and making the application easy to approve. So let's first talk about team member experience. You're going to highlight the team members with significant quality assurance and quality control experience. That's crucial. In terms of compliance and safety, you're going to talk about operational protocols, matching the demands of the compliance standards that were designated by the legislation and the regulations. And you want to be explicit where you can be about how your operation will comply. The regulations are going to be a guide that will drive your procedures, but actual knowledge should come through in more detailed procedural notes around the basic compliance steps that you'll follow. Again, the goal is to make the regulators comfortable that you're going to operate in a safe and compliant fashion. So we always say, don't be clever. Don't show off with transitions, thesaurus shenanigans, and overly verbose language. This isn't the time or place for it in these applications. You want to use the exact language of any regulations that you possibly can, the jargon, the categories, the labels for various products and individuals, so on and so forth. What they are using to refer to their market, you want to echo back in your application. And that's part of how you make it easy to approve. Ultimately, as I mentioned, the plans are being graded on a pass-fail scoring system. So you don't want to take any chances that they're demanding less than 100% coverage of the regulations. These are the best practices that we recommend when putting together an operational plan. We provide the support to help folks move through this. But the idea is that you're looking to do each of these things as you're putting together the operational plan in conjunction with any vendors who might support your application.
So you're asking
Go ahead.
applicants to think not only about owners, but also, key managerial staff, whether or not they're owners, key vendors, and other business partners, even if that information is not necessarily required on the application.
That's right. So we're going to shift gears to the business plan. The MCA states that the business plan must demonstrate a likelihood of success, sufficient business ability, and experience on the part of the applicant. So what we cover here are what we think are the elements of a successful business plan. Essentially, the business plan can be structured in a variety of ways. I've seen a lot of them, and a lot of the formats can succeed, but you have to make sure that you cover the main highlighted points here that are expected in a business plan. So that includes an executive summary, which is an abstract in general, summarizing the license category, location, and social equity qualifications. In general, you have a lot of choices to make about your application and how your business will be structured. We talk about these choices a lot. As John mentioned, it's who your teammates will be, the type of license you're going to apply for, and the location. Those are covered here. And those are the highest level choices that tend to dictate your potential for success. So be careful about thinking them through. You really want to put a lot of emphasis on making those decisions and making them well. So a breakdown of that proposed entity structure, mission, and intended contributions to the market should be in the business plan, along with a discussion of your proposed site for operations, if that's possible. Now, we know it's not required that you include an exact location at this time in this process, but it's helpful. It will allow you to flesh out everything you're talking about in the business plan, put some meat on the bones, as it were, of your outline for your business plan, provide biographies and descriptions of previous experience for team members as much as possible. Again, this is helping the regulator to get a picture of who the people are, how they're going to make this operation compliant and safe. And then in addition to that, you have a proposed staffing plan. You talk about the vendors you're going to engage, specific land use if it's known. All of this lays out for the regulator how you intend to operate the business, who will be involved, what support you'll be getting from vendors, and all of that is to show how you will do it in a safe and compliant fashion. Lastly, the financial plan indicates sources and uses of funds. It can include pro forma, CapEx tables. Ultimately, you want that financial plan to give a clear picture, although it's not entirely required at this phase of the process to go into great detail. That will be at a later phase of the process. The winners of the lottery will then have additional steps that they have to include to disclose their investors and more about their financial plan. The workflow of the business plan, as I mentioned, the format can be a lot of different ways. This is just a recommendation that I'm giving from seeing clients succeed in many markets and knowing that there's a sort of outline that we can provide for you that we know will help to create a robust business plan that will satisfy the regulators. So in this business plan workflow, we talk first about team. As John mentioned, choosing who will be a part of your team, finalizing your team's executive and administrative structure, their roles and responsibilities, and the ownership shakeout. What does that translate to on the team in terms of equity stakes? We do interviews. We think interviews are really important for the development of narratives around the team members, and I recommend that everyone do interviews in order to generate detailed biographies. The good news is that these interviews aren't just for the application process. They're also useful in helping to generate pitch materials for investors or for conversations with municipal stakeholders in a variety of ways that go beyond this application. You'll be able to make use of the content that's generated through those interviews. We recommend talking about the location, like I said, even though it's a lottery process, it's helpful to propose the site so that you can talk about how your intended use makes sense and would play out in that location. We recommend gathering images, commercial real estate basics, zoning, loose renovation plans, anything that you can to help flesh out that image of what you're trying to depict in your business plan. On documents, we have a variety that are going to be required by the MCA. You're going to discuss and explain explain how you've gathered and what documents you've gathered when it comes to formation, operating agreements, investments, disclosures, local approval documents, everything that would be required. You in your business plan would want to at least discuss a bit about how those things came to exist. And then SWOT. This is something that you may have heard of, maybe, in passing. If you went to business school, if anybody has a business background, you learned what a SWOT was. It's identifying the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It's an analysis that you can do anytime you're working through a business challenge. And as you're laying out your business plan, we recommend not only doing a SWOT analysis, but including what you gather as you do your SWOT analysis in the plan, and essentially showing how those things will contribute to your business's success and potential setbacks that you're going to try to avoid or overcome. So in the plan, you'll discuss the strategies that you're going to use, how those will lead to opportunities and what will make you strong. And then also just highlight where you're weak and what threats might come to show that you're aware of them and that you have a plan to make it through those particular things. Then the financial projections. If you're modeling, then you should explore logic and reasoning. If you're hedging till after the lottery and you're not going to model, then you should discuss market history and available statistics on profitability and benchmarks. So ultimately, you need to do one or the other to get to financial projections. You either need to be able to model, or you need to use that market history and data that's out there to get to some projections that you can include in your business plan. So now business plan best practices. We're using visuals, as we talked about, drawing attention to detail, knowing your audience, noting the regulations, and you're going to be persuasive and critical. So what does that mean? As we talked about, using visuals, you're going to make it aesthetically pleasing as much as you can. I know that sounds maybe unnecessary for an application of this type, but it makes everything easier to read and approve in the end. You want to pay attention to formatting, images, the readability, and the pacing of what you're providing. You want to manage first impressions always when it comes to things that you're putting in front of the regulators. So we recommend using placeholder logos. It doesn't have to be your final logo, but you want something that you can use that's an image that represents your business. Maps are always good. They really help people to understand a location or region that you're discussing. And then headshots of people, if you're talking about people on the team, so on and so forth. Anything where you can put a visual in. John jokes about, most people are visual learners. That's the truth. I think as much as you can give images that align with the content that you're putting forth, it's very, very helpful. You want to draw attention to detail as much as you possibly can. So we say here, more is more, which is true, but also you have to be specific and concise. Visually highlight details as much as possible, and don't just include words to include words. As we know, the page limits, of course, the goal tends to be to hit those limits, but you don't want to put in a bunch of fluff. When we say more is more, we want it to be robust informational detail about the business that's in this plan. All sentences throughout should be serving a specific point, and they should stem from that strong initial outline. The skeleton that I talked about earlier. When you put the meat on those bones, you should be making sure that initial outline makes sense, and that when you're writing, you're not just putting in words that don't relate to anything in your outline. They should always be connected to a specific point in that outline. Now, this is for the regulators. So a business plan for the regulators should be more conservative in general than one that's for investors, and would look very different than a plan that is being put forward for a municipal official. The goal, again, is to be specific in creating this for the regulators, knowing your audience, knowing what they're asking for, and using it again as prompts, almost call and answer, to make sure that you're addressing everything that they've said you must. When you note the regulations, you talk about the applicable regulations to the business that you're going to be operating. So you talk about eligibility, operational size or style, the team composition. Some of this will also be covered in the operational plan, but it's important that you're making sure, again, that everything in your plan of how you're going to operate your business is compliant with the regulations. Lastly, being persuasive and critical, you're going to showcase your understanding of the difficulties of a startup phase for any business. You're going to demonstrate a sober awareness of the uncertainty of the legal cannabis industry, and you're going to be persuasive in how you describe your team, the history of success, the goals for the future, so on and so forth. The goal here is to always be acknowledging reality while you're also creating a picture of what will be, and don't try to ignore any of the things that exist, like uncertainty, threats, weaknesses, so on and so forth. Address them head on. Shifting to the diversity plan, last of the plans that we're covering today, and the last of the plans that are going to be required. Again, we don't know length yet. We do know that the diversity plan in general describes the executive team's commitment to creating a diverse workplace. It should describe specific steps wherever possible to positively impact those that are most disadvantaged by the war on drugs specifically. So that's what makes this different than a diversity plan for any industry. We're focused on a diversity plan for the cannabis industry. So the elements of a successful diversity plan include what's listed here. That is affirmative statements and point by point a mission for promoting diverse values in general. Giving diversity statistics on the ownership team and any certifications that you might have, or commitments to maintaining certifications or obtaining them. In general, you want to have the certifications before you're submitting the application as much as possible.
We probably should tell everyone that they don't need to take notes, that by virtue of the fact that they've registered for this presentation, they will get an electronic copy of our slides. So
yes.
If anyone has that question, will you send us these slides? We want to let people know that they can focus on listening to us and not taking any notes.
Good point. And there's a lot of words. As I talked about being visual learners, I in this particular presentation, I did include a lot of words because we're really trying to highlight for you what you know and what you can prepare. So these will be available, as John said. You'll be able to go back through these bullets. And if you have any questions about them, as John mentioned, I am 100% available and accessible. We'll provide our contact information. And so in addition to providing this information, we are available to help with anything that you may not understand in today's presentation. So just turning back here, to what goes into the diversity plan, you want to talk about specific programming, your hiring practices, and the methods of supporting or engaging disadvantaged communities that your business intends to use. Again, you're going to want to use proper nouns. Here we talk about them being hyperlocal, meaning with great specificity. If you can, you want to talk about exactly what you're going to do, how you will communicate, what your team members will do, not, could do, should do, but it should be as much as possible presenting an emphasis of working with historically underrepresented partners, suppliers, contractors, organizations in general to deliver resources and opportunities for disadvantaged or diverse organizations, and doing that to provide cannabis education, mentorship, all things that can lift people up. I mean, that's ultimately the goal of a diversity plan. You want to have workforce development goals and strategies for growing a diverse team, both at the outset and talk about in phases how you'll be able to improve upon it over time. So let's now shift a little bit and talk about strategies for lottery entrants. So in a lottery, and this is where, a lottery is a little bit different. You think about the strategy a little bit differently. Let's first think about how you can enter, what your applicant entries could be. Each individual can apply for one license per category. again, these are just some points to help you think through how to approach how your applications will be submitted. Interested individuals should consider forming separate applicant groups for separate entities when possible, right? So if you need to be a team, be a team. We are not recommending breaking apart a team, but since it's a lottery, as much as possible, if you can apply individually in separate applicant groups with separate entities, then take that approach. You must maintain 65% ownership and control in the qualified executives. So John will talk about this a little bit more, but that goes back to the social equity qualification that we covered earlier. It must be that the ownership and control is maintained 65% or more in those that qualify as social equity individuals. Each owner can appear in up to 2 application categories. So ultimately, that helps you to think through how to increase your approaches at, trying to win this lotto. And you can treat a micro business as a standalone category. So what that means is you can apply as a standard dispensary, for example, and as a micro dispensary in this round at the same time. So, think through those entry points, because you obviously want to maximize your entries. But again, do it in a way that makes sense. This is one of those choices that we go back to, you want to be making good choices that increase your potential to succeed. So you're going to focus on qualifications. Again, this is very important, making sure that you qualify, and you want to focus on your network of possible applicants. So, as you look at your team and determine if they meet the standards, you want to make sure that you have enough to meet that 65% threshold. There will be a social equity pre-qualification process that's released along with the RFA. So you're going to gather your own evidence, in general, from out of state. There will be the opportunity to cast a line in here. It will be a little bit more difficult to prove the qualifications, but you will be permitted to do so. Applications will be organized by county or region for cultivation and processing. So your strategy will vary on, how you spread your applications amongst a team or saturate for better odds in one area. Now, when we talk about spreading applications, again, it's not that you can have multiple applications in as one applicant group outside of those 2 that we talked about, standard and micro, but you can have individuals applying in separate applicant groups and separate entities. Investment, I talked about this earlier. You may have to show a plan for raising capital to some extent. Tying sources of funds to your project, maybe limiting in some ways, and could complicate matters. So we only recommend doing that to the extent necessary at this time, because investment will be a part of the next phase, as we talked about earlier, for those that are winners of this lottery. And lastly, don't wait. These narrative essays should be the first thing that you have complete, because you've spent so much time thinking through that outline, putting, that skeleton in place, so that when you knew what the MCA was going to require, you were just fleshing it out. You can easily make small edits as the rest of your puzzle comes together. But I always recommend to people, don't wait until you know every detail to get started, because it's just way too big of a project. If you wait that long, you'll always be playing catch up. Engage anybody that is a vendor you need early. Ultimately, you want to have a comfort level and a communication repertoire with them laid out, so that by the time you find out the requirements, you're able to just make tweaks, add things necessary, flesh things out where there might need to be a little bit more, but you shouldn't be getting started at that time, for sure. And now we want to give you just, again, a visual to remember and think through at all times. This is Indiana Jones. Now you know, if you were on early, why we were talking about Harrison Ford. you must choose. You have to make choices. Throughout this entire process, your choices are going to dictate whether you fail or succeed. We want you to succeed. We are here offering this information, and again, will be available and accessible to go over this information with you because we want you to succeed. So this is a takeaway, an image for you to remember. You must choose, but choose wisely. Think through these choices and make the best ones you possibly can to give yourself the highest potential to succeed. Now I'm going to turn it over to John to go through some of the things that I alluded to earlier and talk a little bit more about the choices and how we think you can choose wisely.
Thanks, Ellie. That was terrific. That was jam-packed with a lot of great detailed information. And we will go into some of those choices that applicants will need to make in the coming days and weeks and months. So I'm happy to take the baton from you.
Thank you.
Some of the choices that you need to make and some of the things that you need to think about are not just for the application, but also for the potential to operate a business. Who are going to be the people on your team, your sources of funding, your where you will locate your business, and what legal documents you're going to use to tie everything together. So not all of these decisions need to be made for the application itself, but they will be necessary to operate your business. And just like you would not want to move into a house where there were detailed plans for the foundation, but not for the first and the second and the third floor, you need to think about all the things that will enable you to operate the business, not just to apply for a conditional license. So we'll take you through some of those things. Please bear in mind that when selecting a team, should you be lucky enough to win the lottery and receive a conditional license, that license will be, unless and until the rules change, subject to a 5-year transfer restriction. So for a period of 5 years after licensure, the licensee may not transfer ownership or control of the license. Ownership is defined as an attempt to transfer a 100% interest in the ownership of that license, or an effort to transfer more than 50% of the license, or an attempt to transfer an ownership interest of less than 50%, but coupled with the right to control the decisions, the management, the strategy of the licensee. And there is a little bit more definition around what constitutes control. We'll talk about that in a minute. Currently, there are a few narrowly tailored exceptions to the definition of the transfer restriction. One may transfer during the 5-year restricted period ownership or control in the event of the disability, incapacity, or death of one of the affected owners. Right now, it says that in the event that there's a bankruptcy for the licensee, but bankruptcy laws at the federal level are not available to cannabis companies at this point. I think that was put in there in case bankruptcy does become available to cannabis companies. There is a process by which licensees may apply for receivership if they have been approved by the MCA as an approved security agreement and secured creditor. To my knowledge, no one has gone through that process through the MCA under the new rules. And also the 5-year transfer restriction can be avoided in the event of a court order. And it remains to be seen what type of court order would suffice. When we talk about what constitutes control of a cannabis company, this is not just relying on general definitions where you can talk about who has the legal authority. I think this provides some detail as to operational control. Somebody is exercising control over a cannabis company if they have the right to veto certain significant events affecting the company, the right to make operational strategic decisions affecting the company, the right to appoint or remove directors, the right to make major marketing, production, and financial decisions, or signing authority for exclusive contracts in excess of $10,000. That is important to understand and to focus on when selecting people who will be funding your company. If you have financial partners, many of those financial partners will want to exercise certain decisions or have certain veto powers, and many of those might constitute control, which will limit your ability to round out your team with both partners who qualify as SEAs and those who do not. Ellie talked
I think, John, did you freeze? I think John may have frozen. Hopefully, you guys can still hear me.
Froze.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and take over for.
Oh, there he is. All
Oh, there
right.
he
I'm
is.
sorry, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
I didn't take over yet. I was about to. I was hoping you would.
Okay, well, I trust you completely. I'm sorry about the technology hiccup, but I think we're back. I was saying that, Ellie, you mentioned the test for SEAs, and while I'm not going to go over that information, I will say that a good guide to what might be used as qualifying zip codes by the MCA is the list of qualifying zip codes that the Maryland Department of Commerce published in connection with eligibility for SEA loans from the state, loans and grants. And if you are looking for that list of qualifying zip codes, it is available at the end of our presentation. We have a hyperlink for additional resources. That is one of them. So please do check that out. It's not confirmed that that is a definitive list, but that is probably useful for planning purposes. Let's say you prepare a great application, you are entered into the lottery, you win the lottery, and the MCA gives you a conditional license. That is not a license to operate the business. That is a license to go out and take all of the additional steps that you need to take to show them you're going to follow through on your application, you're going to raise the money, you're going to find suitable real estate, you're going to secure it, you're going to hire people, you're going to build out that property. So think when you're applying, what are the additional steps that I'll need to do, take if I am successful? People who are on your team that are successful and being listed on a conditional license will be subjected to several background checks: a criminal background check, a financial background check to make sure that there are no unpaid taxes, a check to make sure that those individuals are not prohibited from taking ownership in the license because they already own an interest in the maximum number of other licenses. They're going to look to see whether or not there are any adverse actions taken against the owners for a professional business license in any jurisdiction. And do you have control of suitable property? So when we talk about choosing wisely, you want to choose your team members wisely. You're also going to want to choose your proposed location wisely, because you'll be entered into a lottery in a jurisdiction that may or may not have sympathetic zoning regulations, and may be more or less popular than other lotteries. So even if you haven't secured a location, you should give thought to where you want to locate the business. You're going to need a name for your applicant, a name for the new business. Under COMAR, you may not select as the name for your applicant a name that has the term cannabis, marijuana, has a suggestion that one might use cannabis as an intoxicant or incorporates the trademarks of other entities. In my non-cannabis, pre-cannabis life, I'm also an intellectual property lawyer, very focused on trying to help people protect their names. In addition to not using a prohibited name, you shouldn't use a name that is very difficult to distinguish because there are dozens or hundreds of other similarly named businesses. You should also think about, should prohibition end, will you be able to use and register that mark outside of Maryland as well? And now this froze. I don't know what's happening. Sorry about that. We'll give it another second or two.
I was going to say I can speak for you. I can't advance the slides for you.
There we go. Sorry about that. we talked about choosing legal documents. I have dealt with many companies where they said, we're going to focus on the application, and if we're successful, then we'll focus on detailed legal documents. Big mistake, because first of all, if you're successful, you'll need to do it anyway. Second of all, once you're successful, the co-owners remember differently who owned what, who's managing the business, who's contributing intellectual property, things like that. So this should be part of your initial budget, not your follow-on budget. When we talk about key legal documents, we're talking about the charter documents, so articles of incorporation if you're forming a corporation, articles of organization if you're forming an LLC. The co-owner agreements that I talked about are essential, and we're going to talk about sort of 4 key topics that are addressed in co-owner agreements. Operational agreements. So under prior versions of Maryland's program, we had management agreements. If you're doing a management agreement or a consulting agreement where you're transferring to others the right to operationalize the business plan of the owners, you really need to think about whether or not it is an inadvertent transfer of control, and whether you're going to want to be with those operating partners indefinitely, or at least through the end of the restricted period. Why? If I haven't given you enough incentive to think about investing and customizing your documents, if it's not important to you as the applicant, it will be important to the regulators. They're probably going to want to see these documents. It will be important to the banks. The banks will want to know, assuming that you do get banks or private lending, they're going to want to know who is signing the documents just to open up an account to take deposits. And if you're dealing with a private lender, they're going to want to know who has the authority, who are they dealing with. We do want to understand the rights and responsibilities of each owner as it relates to your group. And in the event that things don't go well, and sometimes things don't go well, and you have to resort to a mediator or an arbitrator or a judge, these governing documents will help you to identify the intent of the parties and avoid or minimize litigation. The 4 key things that I'd like to see addressed in governing documents and in co-owner agreements are capitalization, distributions, management, and transfers. So in capitalization, it is how does the company acquire money? How will they acquire their build-out costs, their operating funds? I've heard this from a number of different existing operators. Whatever money you think that you need to start your business, double it, and it probably still isn't enough. However much time that you think you're going to need to open up your doors, double that, and it's still not maybe enough. So on the, given the fact that it will be difficult during the restricted period to acquire new investors, and given today's climate where it's difficult to obtain cannabis loans from private lenders, you really do want to think about how are we going to attract the initial capitalization we need. You're either going to get it from a lender, or you're going to get it from an investor, or you're going to get it by reinvesting the operating funds that you have in your business. So your documents should talk about how will there be capital calls. If we are going to take out loans, who has the authority to approve the loan, and on what terms? Will they be loans from the internal investors? Will it be loans from outside parties? And what happens if there's a capital call and people don't pay? You have to think through all those issues. Just like we have to think about how the company will acquire funds, how will the company distribute funds to its owners? Lots of different types of distributions. In many companies, there's a mandatory tax distribution, which says if we are allocating 10% of the profits to an owner, we're going to distribute to that owner enough money to pay his or her share of the profits for that year. Discretionary distributions. Do we want to all get on board with the same 280E tax strategy? People vary wildly on 280E. Some are conservative, some are less conservative. Who is going to make the discretionary determination of when there's enough money, in the company's operating account to make a distribution. Liquidating distributions. Sometimes companies have to dissolve or liquidate, and in what order will the remaining funds be distributed? That should be covered by a co-owner document, and also capital transactions. In the event that somebody merges with or acquires another operator and funds are being transferred, how will those funds be distributed, if at all, to the company's owners? Management. This is really important as well. Who has the authority to manage the company? This should match the restrictions set forth for control. So we want to make sure that the management terms of the operating agreement, the shareholders agreement, the partnership agreement, and any other documents such as a management agreement or a consulting agreement do not inadvertently conflict with the restrictions regarding control. So we'll focus on that. And then transfers. Transfers, obviously, you want to make sure that any transfer rights and provisions that you have in your operating agreement do not inadvertently conflict with the prohibitions or restrictions on transfers, either in Maryland's statutes or the emergency regulations. Right now, Maryland, the MCA is operating under emergency regulations to govern the next year of our program. As a result of next year's legislative session, there will hopefully be more detail, and we'll be able to enact permanent regulations to govern the MCA's oversight of the program. But when you're drafting the documents now, you should not assume that things will not change. In fact, I would encourage everyone to assume that things will change, that the people that you're picking to be part of your team right now for the purposes of the application, some of them will not want to be with the company 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 4 years from now, 2 weeks from now. You never know. Things change. You should not assume that you won't need new financial partners, and those new financial partners will not be requesting equity in the company. They probably will. And when you're calculating your cap table to include SEA individuals and perhaps non-SEA individuals, you should want to reserve room for financial partners and additional non-SEA partners down the road. If you're hiring key employees, and you might have those employees now and you might not, or key consultants that will help you build out your business and grow it, several of them may ask for equity incentives. And if they are not part of the initial cap table, you should be able to think of reasons to potentially include them down the road. You don't want to trigger anything that will cause a problem during the restricted period, either for transferring ownership or control of the company in violation of the current rules. The rules and the regulations will change. Do not assume that they will not change. And that's important because we're operating under emergency regulations, but you're going to have to put forth documents that are sufficiently flexible to anticipate future changes, but not so ambiguous that they're not able to be interpreted clearly. And the company will suffer existential threats over the next couple of years. People talk about cannabis years being like dog years, where every year feels like 7. That has been my experience. As you saw from my bio, 7 years ago, I looked much younger. So be prepared for the unexpected. That's sort of part of our industry. Okay, I mentioned before that there are a number of key resources. If you go to the MCA website, they have a page that has key dates of interest for the rollout of the adult use program, FAQs, the timeline. If there's a link where you can sign up to be notified when the application details will become available. when that 30-day window to receive applications will open. The MCA has told us that they intend to have the 30-day window open in September. They're required by law to give 60 days advance notice of when the application window starts. So, by that definition, sometime in July is only a few more days, we should be hearing from the MCA that the application period is announced, and it will commence 60 days from the date that the application period is announced. So please do sign up to be notified. If you don't hear anything and you want to start contacting Ellie or me early next month, that's perfectly appropriate, and we will notify you when we learn more. If you do want to see a copy of the full emergency regulations, you can click on the link that's in the materials. If you're looking to, with any questions at all about this application process or cannabis law or cannabis applications in general, please do feel free to reach out to us. There is money from the state available for social equity applicants. Right now it's available for HB2 awardees. It will be broadened, but please do pay attention. For HB2 awardees, I believe that the application window ends in August, but there's now up to $5 million in state support that is available. So you don't want to walk away from lower cost or no cost loans or grants if they're available to you. I think that we cover what we need to cover. We only have a few minutes left, and I don't think that we can open it up to questions generally, but I think we have time for one or two questions that we received from people when they were registering for this presentation. So Ellie, why don't I start, and I'll just throw you one or two questions and then you can throw one or two back at me.
Yeah, that's a great idea, John. Let's do it.
So Ellie, from what you've seen about Maryland's application round, you have seen similar processes in other states. How is Maryland's anticipated process similar to or different from what you've seen in other states?
That's a good question. The lottery, of course, is the biggest difference to most nearby markets, but it happens structurally to be somewhat similar to Connecticut or Illinois. The capped license structure, though, is unlike New York and New Jersey, which are nearby. But the caps that have been set aren't unreasonable for a balanced market from what we've seen in other markets as they settle in. The most important aspect, I'd say, is the size and experience of the current medical cannabis industry in Maryland and how that'll impact the level of professionalism, readiness, and ability for the industry to scale, to catch up in this region.
Great.
You want me to give you one, John? Let me throw
Sure.
one. Let me look here. With social equity licenses following behind converted licenses, how will they be given an equitable opportunity to establish themselves in the market and compete effectively?
So there are a number of things that the state of Maryland did to try to create a more level playing field between incumbent operators and new market entrants. One is that obviously in the next round of the application process, only social equity applicants will be allowed to participate. Second of all, there's a provision in the new law that allows incumbent operators to partner with new market entrants, and there's state funding available to support those partnerships. And then third, but also very important, under the emergency regulations, all dispensaries will be required to reserve at least 25% of their shelf space to carry products made by SEA operators. So, dispensaries will be carrying SEA products as well as incumbent products to make sure that if there's not a completely level playing field, it's at least more level. So I think that takes us, we only have about a minute left. Do you have any parting comments?
I just wanted to point to our contact information. You see there, Longview Strategic. You can check out our website. I'm Ellie at longviewstrategic.com, pretty straightforward. And I also wanted to mention Accelerate Cannabis. That is our events arm of Longview Strategic. We did hold a Maryland Cannabis Summit in March that was really well received. We'll be coming back to Maryland to hold another event. So you probably want to go to acceleratecannabis.com, check that out, sign up for the newsletter so that you can be aware of events that I will participate in, along with John Wax of Offit Kerman and many other industry stakeholders that will provide information through that newsletter and at those events.
And as for me, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We would love to chat with you one-on-one. If you have any questions, you can look to that nice young man, my nephew, that picture, and he will reach out and find me. You can also, if you're looking for a shortcut to Offit Kerman's Cannabis group page, you can go to cannabisisok.com. Cannabis is okay as in Offit Kerman, not as in mediocre. We provide great service. We love to hear from you. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate your time.
Can I add one thing, John, before we jump? Remember also, if you're an applicant and you're looking for additional resources in addition to the slides and the recording, we are going to have a checklist that we are going to make available. Just reach out to John or myself if you are an applicant looking to participate in this round or a future round, and we would love to share that checklist with you. It'll be a really robust and useful resource.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Have a great one, guys.